Welcome. On behalf of the Chancellor Search Committee at the University of Colorado, Denver, I welcome you to the open forum for Dr. Keith Whitfield. My name is Dr. Stephanie Sancherico. I am a professor and director of graduate programs in the Department of Mathematical and Statistical Sciences here at CU Denver. I'm excited that you all have decided to join today's conversation, and I look forward to a robust dialogue with Dr. Whitfield. Before we begin, I want to extend a special thanks for your participation as we host this discussion online. We know many of you are looking forward to meeting each of the candidates in person. Alas, with the recent developments with COVID-19, this avenue allows us to safely connect the wider campus community to each candidate and ensure that everyone is still able to provide input on the selection of our next chancellor. Prior to the open forum, we solicited both general questions and questions specific to each candidate. Leaders from Faculty Assembly, Staff Council, and Student Government Association reviewed these questions that were submitted online and identified those that would be asked. Because we were not able to host this conversation in person, we took this additional step to ensure that we ask each candidate a series of questions that reflect the thoughts of the wider CU Denver community. Using the chat feature throughout this Zoom web conference, you're also invited to submit additional questions that come up as we're going through these discussions. In the open forum, we'll do our very best to get through as many questions as possible. We're going to have about 30 minutes. These were for questions that were previously submitted and selected through our shared governance procedures. After that, we'll have about 10 minutes, and this will be for your questions that you've submitted through Zoom throughout our discussion today. When we have about 2 minutes remaining, I will give that signal and let you know that we have one more question to finish up. And then in a moment, we're going to start off, and we're going to have Dr. Whitfield take 5 to 7 minutes to introduce himself, talk about the skills and experiences that he will bring to CU Denver.
I don't understand your question.
Dr. Whitfield currently serves as provost at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan.
Pleasure to see the questions coming up.
Do we have him on, or should we? We appreciate your patience. We're working on just a little technical difficulty getting Dr. Whitfield in.
So he continues to try. If you can just let people wait, hang on for another minute or two, then we expect him to try.
All right. So we're going to take a few more minutes while we get Dr. Whitfield on. The chat is probably open, so if you want to start thinking about those questions, we're certainly going to be taking them in as they come. But we will return in just a couple minutes.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for bearing with us, Dr. Whitfield. So we already gave a little bit of an introduction, and so just to say warmly welcome you. We appreciate you joining us and working through those technical issues. But would you like to take a chance to introduce yourself to the University of Colorado, Denver?
Oh, so that's me to introduce myself, or them?
Oh, you, please. So could you take 5 to 7 minutes to introduce yourself?
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for your patience. You know, what is it? At the worst of times, that's when technology will fail you. That's the situation we have today. But I'm glad to be able to have an opportunity to speak with you. My name is Keith Whitfield. I'm Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs at Wayne State University. I've been here for 4 years, and previous to that, I was at Duke University for about 10 years and served in the provost office there. And just as a way of introduction, I would say, I think a common question that I've been asked is why am I interested in the position? And I think it's because your university is much like ours. It's an urban serving university, which means many things. It's an urban research university, and that brings with it some interesting opportunities as well as challenges. And I think my time here and my previous times has prepared me well to be able to have an opportunity to work with the faculty there to be able to continue to move the progress that UCD has been able to make in the last 5 years under the current president. So with that, why don't I just allow you all to ask me questions and we can go from there.
Fantastic, thank you. And so just, we did a little bit of an introduction before you got on, but to lay out the framework for how we're working through this, we're gonna have about 30 minutes for questions that our shared governance has put together for you. So I'm gonna lead through those questions for you. And as a reminder for those participating, you can also submit additional questions through chat. And we'll have about 10 minutes to work through some of the questions submitted from there. So, Dr. Whitfield, to get us started, could you please share a formative experience in your career that helped to define your leadership style? What did you learn and take away from that experience?
Excellent question. Difficult to figure out an answer. I've had a number of things that have defined particularly my administrative career, and there's one that it wasn't a single moment. It actually was probably 5 years worth of very hard work that I did while I was at Duke University, and that was that we were an institution that did not value or like or appreciate assessment and accreditation. And through many years, multiple ways in which I made sure that we found the value in it, we personalized it and made it so that it worked for us. I believe that I changed the culture there around the issue of assessment and accreditation, and really helped a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people see the value in it in terms of it being a marker for what you could be able to credit your success with by the data and the information that you collected and the proof of student progress and achievement. So that's been one that I think that I want to say that it was a pivotal moment and a wonderful experience because it taught me to work across the university. It provided me an opportunity to have leadership on a very big issue, as well as be able to finely tune listening skills to faculty about what was important and what they found challenging, and to work with them to be able to see how they could work through a problem and actually have it be for their benefit rather than just being a problem that they solved.
Fantastic, thank you for that. So next question, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing CU Denver? And how would you envision your experience and background has prepared you to overcome this challenge at CU Denver as our next chancellor?
There are a number of challenges. Some of them are ones that are common to many institutions of higher ed today. And so I'll pick one of the more direct ones, but the ones that is probably one of the elephants in the room, and that's about enrollment. Because it drives both state funding, as well as we can see a demographic shift that's going to be coming, particularly in the next 5 or 6 years. That was not a COVID cough, so please excuse me. So we know that there's this, huge demographic cliff that's going to be coming in 2026, and that it will be institutions that have branded themselves and identified themselves as a value-added proposition that will draw students to their campus, and unfortunately, I hate to say it, but away from other campuses. And so that's one of I think the biggest challenges. There are a number of strategies that I believe need to be employed by institutions like UCD. One is to make sure that people understand what the benefit of UCD is and what the brand is. Who is it? Not necessarily who is it, but what are the strengths that you get from a UCD education? And I think that sometimes we think about that implicitly. We know about it as faculty or members of a university community, but the college going public doesn't always necessarily understand. And so there needs to be a bit of a branding campaign to make sure that the strengths are very, very clearly articulated. Be able to have voices of students be able to chime in and talk about what they get from investing in that education. and also to be able to strengthen some of the research portfolio that's there. I know the relationship between the medical campus and the main campus, and I think that there's a lot of opportunities to be able to strengthen that research piece, which in many ways goes towards that branding effort. And so that's just some of the ways, but ways in which you can draw attention to the excellent education that UCB actually offers is very, very important. We've been doing it here in a number of ways. Some of the ways have been breaking the traditional business practice of universities, which is that you don't forgive debt for students. Debt among students for higher ed is one of the biggest issues. And one of the ways that we have done it very creatively is to talk to those students who had debt and find a way to re-engage them and bring them back to the university so that they can get their degrees. Interestingly enough, you can forgive, maybe we forgive $1,500 worth of debt for the student, but their re-engagement back to the university actually produces a positive ROI so that you're actually bringing in more research dollars because it's kind of almost like a do-over. And you're, rather than excluding people with that, using debt to exclude people, we actually allow people to come back and re-engage and reinvest, and those tuition dollars come to the university, and we allow people to be able to move forward and be able to get their degrees. So I think that answers your question.
Great, thank you. You actually are anticipating a little bit of our next question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. So what are some steps you have taken at your current institution to support student success, and how might they apply here at CU Denver?
See, I'm so good, I was actually able to read your mind and know what you were going to ask.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it, but like what's going on at UC Denver, which I know that you all have made a serious investment in doing some administrative structures, as well as some consultation on student success. We've been doing some of the same things, and they really do yield a lot of positive outcomes. But once you can move the needle forward, it becomes harder. It's not just about having advisors or having teams that are paying attention to data on student progress or barrier courses and things such as that. The next thing is that you have to enlist the faculty, and you can enlist them in many ways. One that we've been doing here that I just cheekily say, faculty success is student success, and student success is faculty success. And what that means is that we make sure that we pay attention to and acknowledge that the true success that our students have, while they can be advised what to do, they still have to take the courses from the faculty. The faculty are a critical linchpin in student success across a student's career. And so getting them to actually think about that, and then also to acknowledge when we have some of our superstar faculty that are really contributing to that. The next step in our development here that we've been beginning conversations about, and they're very difficult conversations because it's not an easy thing to do, and that is that how in the promotion and tenure process can you actually clearly identify student success as one of those contributions to someone's tenure packet that need to be acknowledged and appreciated and actually consider part of what is thought of as successful progress to that next level of promotion. So the student success piece of it, it has to be all hands on deck. It has to be a culture that actually not just you have, dedicated advisors doing, the faculty has to feel like they're a part of it as well. I think when it's separated, it never gets you to those higher levels of graduation success.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing that further. Next question, what do you see as the promises and perils of the move to greatly expand online education? Certainly that's a timely question.
Well, oh my gosh, COVID-19, nobody's thinking about online education. Oh, I have, and I've heard it of your institution, and I can say that of my institution. I truly have been just absolutely amazed at how our faculty have thought about, worked very hard to convert to online. And, you know, this is being done in such a short period of time. It really shows you how great faculty actually are. Well, so they're doing that now, and what I've been doing is thinking about, so where are we going to be in 4 or 5 months? And what I'm hoping is that this experience with online will actually make it so that faculty as a community can have that conversation in a very informed way. Because you're a brick and mortar, you know, institution of higher learning. And it doesn't mean that you should not do online, but it doesn't mean that your value, that proposition that you actually bring is really all about online. But having some kind of combination where you use online as one of the many tools to be able to provide students with an education that's outstanding is, I think, something that hopefully on the backside of this we're going to come out of and be able to have a conversation on. Online does provide some interesting opportunities. If you have full degree programs, it is the idea that you can broaden your reach. But what many of the really big providers will tell you is that your reach is still going to be probably geographically limited. When, you know, unless you're going to put 30 or 40 or $50 million into it, you're not going to be a Penn State Global or a Purdue Kaplan sort of organization. So where does it sit in the students that you draw and your ability to be able to provide education to those who can't come to your physical campus all the time? But having a little bit of mix of both and then using online as a tool, and rather than as a crutch or something that you just completely rely upon, I think is what is going to help differentiate UCD from a lot of other schools.
Thank you. So switching gears a little bit, describe how you would approach fundraising for our campus. How would you coordinate and cooperate with efforts at the SEAM system level?
Okay, well, a short question with a long possible answer. You know, it's very interesting. The Denver metropolitan area has seen this incredible growth. There have been a lot of companies that have come into town. And I can tell you that I think that the time is ripe for the university to be able to engage those companies and talk about the workforce needs that they have. If you hire people that are committed to being in the area, they're going to have them as longer term employees. And that's what most of these companies are really focused on, is not an employee that's going to be there for 2 or 3 years, one that's going to be there for at least 5 to 10 years, because it means their investment is greater. So that provides an avenue for engaging them and having them think about their philanthropic arms that can support an institution that ultimately supports them. In addition, if you become an institution that clearly shows that you provide critical support for things of social import, such as food insecurity, or things like being able to understand big data, or public health crises like where we're involved in now, and even from a social science perspective of what does it mean to socially distance yourself? Are you going to socially isolate yourself, and what implications does that have? For many of those companies, even the tech companies, they're going to be concerned about that. And if UCD can position itself to be a leader in terms of contributing both to their knowledge and to the society that they live in, the value added in terms of engaging that actually becomes much better. I would also say that thinking about ways in which innovation and entrepreneurship, where you engage industry in ways that some of the bright faculty actually may be able to have problems that are the same kinds of problems that industry is interested in, and be able to engage and make connections is a very good way to be able to, it's a different kind of philanthropy. It's really meeting some of the research mission, but it is connecting with those outside entities. And then lastly, I would say that continuing to build on what the current president has been doing in terms of seeing you all as a civic leader. I think the city center is a fantastic opportunity to be able to really have this kind of jump off point to be able to make very important connections to the community, where the community then sees the value of the university and thinks about ways that it can invest in it. That provides a much more clear way to be able to connect with donors for them to understand before you ever get there that, you know, you are the institution that's really helping to make Denver a better place. I do know that, you know, this is a campus that's part of a system, and that there's coordination that needs to go with the central efforts that are being done. But I think as Chancellor, that's one of the most important things, is making sure that there is a carve out that is really identified as the piece that UCD should be getting and should be pursuing and should be encouraged and should be connected to possible donors.
Fantastic, thank you. So for our participants, I just wanted to give you a reminder that we do have the chat open. We've got about 15 more minutes of questions that have been shared and organized through shared governance. But if you have questions that are coming up as we go throughout this discussion, please remember to use that chat window, and we'll get to those questions next. So next question, Dr. Whitfield. Universities across the nation are reporting a mental health crisis on campuses. What are your prior experiences in dealing with this, and what do you see as ways to support students in this regard?
Oh, thank you so much for that question, because that is something that I've been very dedicated here while I've been at Wayne State University. One of the interesting things that's happening, even at urban campuses where, you know, we don't have a residential campus, but we have people that are on campus for good parts of the day, is that there is stigma that is coming off. It's the stigma associated with mental health issues is probably better now than it was 15 or 20 years ago. And so there is some advancement there. But I think what it's doing is challenging institutions of higher education to be able to make sure that you meet that need. For example, here we have an area that's called our unit that's called our Counseling and Psychological Services. Fantastic unit, does wonderful things, but the waiting list grew probably over, I think we tracked it for the last 10 years, from about 2 weeks to about 6 months. And it was simply because of the number of people that were in line. Now, people that have serious problems, we do a triage, and we actually try to get those people services as soon as possible. But we started really taking a step back, and my background is in psychology, and so it was easy for me to think about some of these things. But to think about, you know, so who's in the line and what's going on with them? And how can we actually reduce that line? So first, what we did was to increase the capacity of that particular service by doubling the number of counselors. That was able to cut the line in half, but we still had, I don't know, it was maybe 12 weeks worth of wait time, and that was too long. We would still pull out those people with very serious illnesses, but some of the ones with more moderate conditions and situations were still waiting in line for far too long. For many of them, we could suggest that they go to a provider that was in the city. The only thing is that then it would have to hit on sometimes for students on their parents' health insurance, and that was something that, you know, for lots of them they didn't want to do. So we didn't get a lot of takers. But what I thought about was that, you know, again, who's in that line? There are plenty of students that experience anxiety and stress and other issues of non-well-being that really could be helped through other sorts of activities on campus. And so we worked on our mindfulness, and we worked on yoga, and we worked on making sure that we connected some of the other psychological services that were on campus, had stress reduction, did lots of other programmatic things. And believe it or not, we had many of these things on campus, but you had to navigate such a labyrinth to get to one of those issues. It was never clear if you had an issue of exactly where you went. And so what we've done is create a program that's called Warrior Life, where students can actually far more clearly see lots of different services, pick the ones that may be addressing them, reach out to people. We have peer advisors. It makes well-being much more easy to address on this campus. In addition, in that broad realm of well-being, I worked with our Dean of Students and started a food pantry, because food insecurity is something that we don't talk about, that is an issue of well-being, and probably a much greater issue than I think we actually know on this campus. And some of the other things have included in a very, very broad sense of wellness, of financial wellness. And so we've been working on developing some online materials to be able to help students think about how they manage the finances of their college career. I don't believe that a lot of us have learned a lot from what happened in the downturn, and that students really need to learn about what it means to manage that debt that they are accumulating to be able to get that better job and to be able to truly benefit from it at the other end. So those are just some of the things and thoughts that I have around well-being.
Absolutely, great. So next question. What is your experience working with shared governance? So for us, it's Faculty Assembly, Staff Council, Student Government Association. So shared governance groups, and what role do you envision that these shared governance groups would have under your leadership?
Yes, thank you for that question. I hold a very interesting role here. I think I shared it a little earlier with one of the groups. I am actually the chair of the Faculty Senate, and I'm chair of the Executive Committee of the Faculty Senate. There is a president, and for the most part, they make the agenda, but I think long ago they believed that administrators would never come and sit in and be a part of a shared governance if they weren't a part of the committee. So I hold that role, and what I've tried to do is to be able to break down some of the silos and some of the back and forth that used to go kind of as an us against them in terms of administration, the faculty, and talked about ways and had examples and done things where we made sure that on all of our important committees, on many of the important decisions that were being made, that there was faculty representation. And so I think in terms of philosophy around faculty governance, it's the idea that there needs to be a back and forth communication that's shared. There is always ultimately decision makers, but those decision makers should be informed by the voice of the faculty. And you can't hear that unless you actually have some connection with them. While I think that the one here, I think was designed for one purpose, I think over time what we've been able to do is to slowly morph it into something slightly different. It's still not perfect. But I think that the folks here do understand that I put out a very concerted effort for anything that happens on the president's cabinet for them to seek out either the Faculty Senate or some of our other faculty governance representative groups to be able to solicit input from others so that it's not just a bunch of administrators sitting around the table. You really have a diverse set of voices so that we can best be able to address some of the issues that come up, whether it be budget, whether it be culture and climate like bullying, whether it be trying to figure out how we're going to do environmental sustainability issues, all of those sorts of things, making sure that we have a real diverse set of voices that represent lots of different elements of the university.
Thank you for that. So next question, please share a time in your career where you have made a significant mistake as a leader, as well as how you use that as an opportunity to learn and grow.
This one's a really difficult question because I've made no mistakes in my long career. I just can't think of one. So a number of ones. One in general, and I'm trying to be as non-specific as possible because it's one that I've done since I've been here, is that, you know, as we pick leaders, those leaders sometimes can make mistakes. And we pick leaders, you know, at the level that I'm at, I pick leaders to run parts of organizations. And, you know, I have to depend on them and I have to trust them to some degree, but there are some things that you have to also shepherd through. You have to work with that leader. And there has been one issue that I didn't think I needed to attend to, and I did need to attend to it. And the leader that was there, I think, made several missteps. And we need to come back around and do a lot of effort to try to clean it up. And what was interesting is that this was a piece about culture, about the culture of a particular unit. And I think that's sometimes when it needs to be multiple hands on deck, and it needs to be that, you know, from the top to the bottom, there needs to be attention paid to it, and to take a team approach to make sure that you think through the kind of missteps. And I think there was an unintentional consequence to a particular decision that was made that I don't think I would have made if I did it, but ultimately I'm responsible for it, and it's something that I had to work with that leader to try to fix once a misstep was made. So I'm sorry that that's not more specific than that, but I think I would surmise it to say that there are those things that you learn from making sure that you're attending to the things, particularly about culture, and making sure that decisions are made, and that you, with the leadership team that you have, you talk through those things and make sure that you're on the same page in terms of how they should be taken into account and how they're actually carried out. But it's one of those things where it taught me the frailties of leadership, of that sometimes you have to depend on leaders, and those leaders are people, and sometimes they make mistakes.
Sure, understandable. So before our next question, for participants, I want to let you know that we're extending our forum until 1:15 to give adequate time for all. And we do appreciate your patience as we've been struggling with some technical issues. But with that said, let's take a look at our next question for Dr. Whitfield. Dr. Whitfield, please describe what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you. What actions have you taken in your current role to embrace this?
So let me try to address the first part of that question, which was, what does it mean to me? It is interesting. Diversity and inclusion are two different things. We say them so quickly together sometimes. I think that we think about them as a single concept, and typically we think about them as being able to have diversity in terms of ethnicity, in terms of our faculty and our students. But diversity means that, you're looking at sexual orientation, you're thinking about differences in religious beliefs. There's lots of different ways to think about diversity. And then inclusion is the idea that, it's fine to invite somebody to the table, but if you don't put any food in front of them, if they don't get to be actually a participant, diversity is just meaningless. It really means that you just have a bunch of people there, but they're not really a part of a university community. One of the beliefs that I have that I think came from some of the arguments that were made in Michigan years ago was that diversity was actually a benefit to providing a quality education. The idea that when you have a diverse set of people who have different thoughts and backgrounds and perspectives, you can actually create an intellectual and an educational environment that benefits all. So bringing diverse voices to a table in a classroom, to trying to solve university problems, those are all things that actually benefit us in the long run, and for many different reasons. And so that's my, I think, perspective on it. What was the second part of your question?
Let's see. What actions have you taken in your current role to embrace this?
So I would provide you with just a piece of what I've been doing here by touching on, I think, two different perspectives. One has been the idea of celebrating diversity. So our LGBTQ community, being able to support, there's a chief diversity officer that we have, and what I have done is made sure that, because they were not very well funded, to be able to make sure that they're funded so that they could have their celebration, so that student groups, Latino student groups would be able to meet and be able to celebrate, connect together. I think that connection piece, when you're on an urban campus and sometimes people feel like they kind of just come and go, the idea of making a place and making a space and making a time to be able to celebrate those different groups, those different people, their different perspectives is very, very important. And I've been supporting that on a number of different ways and with a number of different diverse groups. The other way that we've been doing it as well is really putting, I think, our money where our mouth is. And that's the most recent one has been around gender inequity in terms of pay. It's an issue that is so old, it almost becomes cliche. But what we've been doing is supporting a group that was taking a look at our data and seeing what the differences are and seeing why we were having differences in pay between men and women. And so we've done two actions. One was to create a pool of equity dollars that could be used each year to be able to try to reduce the inequities that we saw between men and women, both at the faculty ranks and at the staff ranks. And the other piece of it is that we were taking this to the deans and making sure in their hiring practices that they were really attending to this. So, you know, I have like this little hit sheet of some of our best paid faculty, both who are men and women. And whenever a hire comes by my desk, I take a look at it and think about what the comparison is between what some of the higher paid folks in those different areas are and what the differences are, and to try to encourage and make sure that we're not starting people off under a deficit, because what typically happens is that deficit grows, and then it's even harder to get to points of equity. So those are two examples of things around diversity and inclusion that I've been working on.
Thank you. This is a little bit of a longer question, so I have no problem repeating parts of it. In what ways do you see student affairs functions contributing to the educational mission of the university? How has the student affairs function optimized the student journey in your experience, and where has it fallen short?
Okay, that is a longer question. Let me see.
It is, and we can break it apart. We can start with part one.
I know. Let me see if I can take a couple of pieces of this at a time.
Sure.
So first off, one of the things that was actually very attractive about this position for me was that while provosts typically deal with the faculty affairs, this one did have student success and some other student-oriented things underneath it. And about a year after I was here, we really started pushing the idea that we really needed something in the student affairs realm, but the cost of creating another administrative structure was more than what we were able to take on at the time. So they said, hey, Keith, you know, you're a big champion for this. Why don't you take it? So actually, a good bit of student affairs reports to me, both residence life, the dean of students, student success, and even multicultural affairs for students all report up to my office. And so structurally, that's been something that I've been involved in. And what I think is interesting is that even though it ends up being a very large portfolio that I have, what I've been able to do is to be able to connect different elements of student affairs together who kind of used to be siloed. I think our housing, and which has its own curriculum and different things that they try to do around student and residential life, and then student life, which was under the dean of students, weren't really connecting in meaningful ways. And now after a couple of years of really getting them, setting out tasks for them to work on together and making sure that they communicate through problem solving that arises, there's a much greater connection, and I think it's made a much more robust student and on-campus life for students. One of the other benefits of that has been to be able to connect some of the leaders that work on issues around faculty with getting them to be able to appreciate student affairs. So as we meet as a leadership group, we have different opportunities for people to talk about what's going on in their area, and then to think about some of the problems that arise and how we're going to solve them. I take my office as a team sport, is what I like to say, and that, you know, for any problem that comes up, we typically have at least two people on it. And for a lot of these problems, which is fascinating, we have somebody from student affairs and somebody from faculty affairs, because I think that we ultimately come up with much better answers that way. So that's the first part about the work in the back. And maybe even the second part of the question. What was the second and third part of the question?
Second part of the question. So how has the student affairs function optimized the student journey in your experience, and where has it fallen short?
I can only remember the second one so far, so I may come back and ask you about the third one. So for the second one, it's one of the ways in which our two universities are actually very similar. And that is that we know that student success is important. And so we are investing resources around it. What you will see is that, you know, a good bit of it has been the time that I've been here, but there was a foundation that started even before I got here, that we saw one of the biggest increases in six-year graduation rate in the country in the last couple of years. And we have even won the American Public Land Grant University's award for degree completion. That has come with a really significant focus and even a little bit of reallocation towards student success. And I know you all are doing some of the same thing. That ultimately has accounted for our success, but it's had to be very systematic, very strategic, and it had to be supported from the top down. So the president and myself are actually, you know, we get regular briefings, and actually I do a lot of work with student success in terms of making sure that it's operating the way that it should. Our external consultants that we use, I do a good bit of managing with them and making sure that we get the most out of them. And then I also make sure that I'm involved in taking it, you know, kind of to the streets, as it were, to work with faculty and work with students, and to think about ways in which we can make sure that we strengthen the infrastructure that is around getting students to the finish line. Student success is going to be one of those things that, as you think about the 21st university, it's one of the things you've got to be known for. You've got to be known for, you know, big data, or, you know, health, or different, you know, conceptual sort of pursuits, but also making sure that students who come to your university are successful is going to be a metric that, you know, people are paying attention to it now. I think they're going to continue to pay even more attention to it in the future. So that's an attempt to answer number 2. What was number 3 again? I'm sorry.
All right, number 3, so third part. How has the student affairs function fallen short, in your opinion?
So I think the student affairs function falls short in part because, and I think that many universities go through this, and that is that it evolves. At first, if you have the kind of urgency that we have put on our student affairs here at Wayne, I think a lot of different solutions come up, and what the challenge is, and I think this is again where if you don't have adequate resources, you come up short, and that is that there are so many different dimensions of student success, from belongingness to preparedness when students get to the university, to being able to make sure that curricula provide clear pathways, to being able to identify ways in which transfer students can clearly be able to come to the university and get to the finish line. All of those things create lots of different issues. And I think sometimes, not that one bullet is going to solve everything, but sometimes we make one-offs for each one of them. And what we do is we run out of resources and we run out of people. And so it's always important, and that's what we're doing now, even in our evolution, is taking a step back and thinking very strategically, how can we focus on some of the bigger issues that are there for students? Make sure that we use things to be able to fill in the cracks where students can fall between. Like one of the examples, that it's one that I love, that we do, is that we've created a chat bot. You know, students have questions and they don't know where to go. So we've created a chat bot, which is an artificial intelligence system where students can call up, and it learns as it asks questions. If it doesn't answer your question, it says, "Oh, did I not answer your question?" And you get some more information. But to have those main things, and then have things that help students that fall between the cracks with their specific things. But I think that, again, it's not one single bullet that ends up being the approach that you use. But if we have a shotgun approach where we're trying 10,000 different things, typically we don't have most universities don't have the bandwidth to be able to answer all of those questions. So there's got to kind of be a consolidation of that, and some different focal areas that are used to be able to address some of the shortcomings that happen in student affairs.
Thank you. Thank you for working with me through those various parts. 5 more minutes, please. We're going to do 5 more minutes on questions that were previously submitted, and then we'll switch to the chat questions. Please feel free to keep submitting those. You have a couple more minutes to get those in. So Dr. Whitfield, For your next question, given that CU Denver strives to serve a variety of underrepresented populations, how will you ensure CU Denver continues to improve without it being unaffordable for these populations?
Can you repeat the last part of that question?
How will you ensure CU Denver continues to improve without it becoming unaffordable for these populations?
You know, that's interesting, because I think sometimes people believe that improving means just simply piling on more resources and more dollars towards an issue. What I would do as chancellor is to try to make sure that you create a campus culture where the success of everyone is central to what is being done at the university. And to some degree, there are resources that go along with that, but there is also the mindset, a growth mindset of that faculty actually provide a developmental opportunity for students, and what is it that they think students get from what they do. Engaging faculty in that way, engaging staff and understanding that that one positive thing that they actually present to a student as they come through may be what sends them on the correct path. So as you think about the ultimate goal of being able to provide equal opportunities for lots of different kinds of students from different backgrounds, both economically, ethnically, orientation, whatever it may be, those come from the culture that you create in the faculty and staff. And you do have to have programmatic answers to things. You have to have programs that actually address what those issues are for those students. But the people in those are what are critically important. And the perspective that they take, that actually even those people are allowed to have developmental opportunities, to have opportunities to be able to improve themselves, create a campus culture that ends up addressing some of those issues. And so I think I'm taking a particular slice at that question of just thinking of saying that, you know, just being able to provide money to build more programs does not always necessarily lead to a solution to answers. It has to be that you create efficiencies. I think that's part of my last answer, which was to try to figure out what some of the critical issues are. I am a data kind of person, and so I like being able to use the previous performance of students and some of the struggles that they've had to be able to identify whether you have barrier course issues, whether you have, you know, whether it is how students run out financial aid, whatever it may be in terms of trying to elucidate what the challenges actually are, find out what those are, and then develop focused strategies around those things, rather than doing the millions of different things that you can do that may not be appropriate for the large number of students who actually you want to try to help and be able to get across the finish line.
Thank you. In terms of a little task keeping, so we're going to switch to questions that have been provided through chat online. We'll have about 10 minutes of that. And then we'll have 3 minutes for Dr. Whitfield to give some closing remarks, and then we will wrap up on our end. It's 1 o'clock, we have about 15 more minutes. So in terms of questions that have been submitted through our chat, what is your philosophy regarding online program management companies such as Pearson and 2U to outsource digital education efforts?
That's an interesting question. In my previous institution, we actually were considering engaging with 2U. And I know that you all have some connections with them. I think the wonderful, interesting benefit is the idea of synchronous education. I think that many people believe that part of the quality challenge to online is that it's not in real time. You don't get that back and forth interplay that you get when you get face-to-face engagement. And so, you know, that technology is, I think, wonderful technology. It's fascinating. I think that there are certain programs that it's probably even better suited for than others. 2U made a lot of their name from working with USC. And I think it was with their master's in nursing and graduate education in particular. So there may be some programs that are just better suited for some of those kinds of opportunities that come from external companies like 2U. What I would say, though, is that I'm a big believer in building an institution's own internal capacity, and that, you know, you don't want to outsource things that you don't want to that you don't have to outsource. Typically, there's a loss in the revenue that is generated from efforts when you have a partner. It's, of course, they're not going to do it for free. They're doing it so that they can generate revenue. So I think that there's many ways. Actually, I haven't looked to see if you all had a Center for Teaching and Learning. Our Center for Teaching and Learning are helping, you know, groups of 20 to 30 faculty at a time. And it's interesting because over the last 2 years, we've probably increased by about 200% the number of new faculty that come and are interested in thinking about ways in which they can improve their pedagogy. And some of that ends up leading to online education. But one of the things that I've been working on here is to create our own capacity. We have faculty who are interested in doing it, but we weren't building the IT infrastructure to be able to support it. And so we're doing that. And before COVID-19, we were going to release something that was going to be a portal. It would be a place that people could go and be able to learn about the online offerings. But, you know, it's an interesting question because I know that there are things that some of these specialized companies can offer in terms of technology that one doesn't have, but there are a lot of things that can be built internally, and that has a cost savings to it and actually an increase in profit margin for the university itself. And I think that that's very important in that space. It just depends on, I think, the kind of program and the extent to which one wants to actually engage in the online space. I do believe that UCD does need to try to increase its involvement in the online space, but how much is the question? And I think that it all comes down to making sure that you can provide, you know, great delivery of great content, because if you've just got a bunch of, you know, goofy videos that really don't have very good content, don't have good production value, no one's going to subscribe to them. Nobody's going to do it, and so you will have wasted the money. So there needs to be a healthy kind of combination between the two of these external providers and creating your own internal capacity as a university to provide quality online education.
Okay, thank you. We do have a number of very helpful resources for improving teaching both online, which is very important now. So just to answer your question, since you couldn't see me nod my head to your question. So next question. Racism and sexism are systemic issues in higher education, including at CU Denver. Can you please identify a common racist or sexist university policy or practice and describe how you would go about dismantling that policy or practice?
Oh my goodness. They must not have gotten the memo that you're supposed to send me easy pitch questions. That is a really difficult one. You know, I'm thinking about some of the ones that we have been working on and changing, and some of them have been around family leave. I think it really has been fairly recent that we were making sure that when you think about family leave, that family leave is not just for women who may be having children, but also could be very good for men. And that even not just when a child is born, but sometimes there are other issues that go on within families, and that needs to be an appropriate time for leave, and that leave should equally be distributed to men and to women. The question was framed in terms of actual policies, and I'm trying to think of policies that have implications that ultimately differentiate by race or differentiate by gender, and that's the first one that pops to mind. You know, one could argue that to some degree, even as we look at promotion and tenure strategies, that for many people of color, they do a lot in terms of providing emotional support, informal mentoring, things that don't really show up on a tenure dossier as clearly. And so, you know, to some degree, not having as large a resource portfolio or even as many, you know, classes or whatever, that they may be providing a very valuable in other sources is a way in which to think about that. Also, when we use teaching evaluations, which we know have typically have gender bias and also have ethnicity bias and have age bias to them, that's implicitly a policy that when you just take the numbers at face value, actually hold that same bias as well. So that's an attempt to try to answer that question.
Great. Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and then we're going to have Dr. Whitfield give some closing remarks. So last question up, about 70% of all undergrad instruction is taught by adjunct faculty who aren't being paid a living wage. In essence, our most vulnerable faculty are teaching our most vulnerable students. What would you do about this?
This is a huge current issue. Most universities are seeing that the instructional mission is being taught by folks who are paid less and have shorter contracts, are more vulnerable in terms of, you know, if a bad budget year comes up, to losing their jobs. And it's just a huge issue. We have been dealing with that here very, very recently, where we had a number of our lecturers who were up for renewal, and it was truly part due to contractual obligations of that. We had to let people go early so that you can't let them go too late so that they could go out and look for another job. But we had an incident where I think that it wasn't done strategically. It was done kind of as one fell swoop. And I think that it led people to believe that they really weren't appreciated. And I think that that was never the intention, but I could definitely see how they could feel that way. And, you know, this is in that particular setting, in that particular situation, what I did was to step in and to help. This was for one of our colleges here, to be able to help them to say, you know, regardless of what's going to happen with the budget cuts that we know will be coming in the next few months, that here is some strategic funding to be able to make sure that you can work with your faculty. And I've got them set up using a particular software tool to be much more predictive about the faculty that they'll need and who they do need and don't need, and even how you can better be able to use your lecturers so that you're not hiring people and then firing people. That the people that we hire, you know, the great number, the exact number that we need, and that we would be able to pivot and be able to keep them on longer. But there's a bigger issue here too. And I think that it was articulated in the question about, you know, this is the most vulnerable part of our faculty who teach many times the most vulnerable part of our students. And I think that it's one of the ways in which, when we look at the underfunding of higher education, I think that it's that vulnerable population of faculty that we're talking about who has probably taken the biggest brunt of when those cuts happen, and that their salaries don't keep up with tenure track salaries. I have been working here, and it is a different and difficult way to try to reallocate so that we raise some of those salaries higher. I don't know if they would ever be at the level of a tenure track faculty hire, but they need to be high. They need to be higher. You know, I don't know whether I would be able to argue convincingly of exactly what a living wage is, but the folks who are offering those courses oftentimes are offering 4 or 5 courses, and they've got to have another job just to be able to live. It should be that they are part of our university community, and we appreciate them, and that we pay them at a wage where this can be their job, that this is their life. That's typically what they want to try to have, and I think that that's something to strive for. But it means reallocation of limited funds, and it's something that needs to be done strategically, making sure that we don't overhire for the people that we have, And I think that there's a whole nother dimension to this, and that is the culture that exists, that those people should be seen as full citizens within an intellectual community, within a scholarly community, and not somehow as, oh, the people who just teach for us so we do these other things. Those are very important things to make sure that all of it is valued, so all of those folks are valued, even if there might be some difference in terms of pay. So I'd stop there with that question, but it's a huge question that's going to take a lot of careful thought and process to be able to find ways that we can make sure that we value people that provide such an important service, the instruction of our students, in disproportionate numbers, to make sure that we actually talk about that and find ways to make sure that we make their lives better.
Thank you. So I thank you for all of your answers to our questions. Would you like to take 3 minutes to provide us some closing remarks addressing the University of Colorado Denver?
Okay, 3 minutes. I have been in faculty mode in my previous engagements, and so I'm going to try not to be too much of a lecturer here, but UCD, I think, is so well positioned to have a huge impact, an even bigger impact that it's had. I think in the Detroit metro, in the Denver, excuse me, I'm in Detroit, in the Denver metro area, but it needs to be thinking about the things that are going on within the landscape of higher education. I think the lecturer piece is one issue. I think in terms of trying to make sure that you have a diverse campus, that you have equity in terms of affordability and access to students. These are really big challenges to address, but I think that the kind of faculty that you have that care about students, that care about student success, those are things that with focus and with dedication and with, strategic planning actually really can be something that the university is known for. And I think within the UC system actually can stand out shoulders and above what some of the others do. I do think that potential is there. I've had some of those experiences changing those things here at Wayne State University, and it does come from leadership, but it comes from making sure that you really engage, enlist, and empower the people that are on the ground. And so the people that are doing those instructions, the people that are doing interesting research, they all have to be harnessed together in ways in which they're valued, that we show their worth, and that we provide opportunities for them to grow and be able to do even more. I would say thank you for your time today. Thank you for the questions. And I've enjoyed getting to know you all a little bit better.
Great, thank you. And thank you for all your thoughtful responses to our community's questions. A few logistics to wrap up. So each of these forums will be recorded, and today's will be available after 5 p.m. You can get to them through 2 ways. So you can refer to the email you received Wednesday, March 18th, or if you go to ucdenver.edu, there is a link to Dr. Whitfield's information, as well as on that page a link to the video and a link to the survey for you to provide your input. Please we are encouraging you to fill out that survey. Your comments are welcome anytime from now through Sunday, that's Sunday, March 21st by 5 p.m. We expect a decision from President Kennedy to be announced by the end of March. So please do take that opportunity to provide your feedback for us to consider. And just one more thing, so a reminder to join us tomorrow at noon for the open forum with our other finalists. Tomorrow's forum will be comparable in format as today. So without video, it'll be via phone, and with a photo, so just as we have done today. We appreciate your understanding as we keep up our efforts to be equitable to both of our finalists. And with that, thank you again, Dr. Whitfield, for your time this afternoon and for bearing with us through all those technical difficulties.
Thank you all very much for your time today, and make sure that you're safe and make sure that you're healthy. Take care.
Same to you. Thank you.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks to all for joining.